of a quotation that I often like to quote, and I kind of searching through my things and I found it. It says, "Preachers or laymen advanced in years cannot have one half the influence upon the young that the youth devoted to God can have upon their associates." So you guys, I just have enjoyed the young people of this church. How many have enjoyed them? Yes, oh my goodness, what a blessing you guys are. So thank you so very much. And as we're talking about research, it's very interesting to see what they have learned about why kids leave the church. Roger Dudley, back in the 80s, did a study that still is holding true in terms of what he found. And the number one reason they gave for leaving the church among this group of teens was that the church service was boring. Let me tell you, if you're involved in church service, like we saw the teens involved with the choir, etc., in church service today, you're not going to leave the church if it's meaningful and you're involved. But they say when it gets boring and irrelevant, why come? So we do have a responsibility to keep the services up to date, relevant, and you guys have done an amazing job. The other thing that they gave in terms of the reason for leaving the church was there was too much legalism and hypocrisy in the church. Kids don't understand some of the things that we have grown up with, and we have made kind of like rules, but they're not in the Bible. It's just tradition, and we go by that tradition. So we're trying to, as adults, be a little bit more open to let the kids enjoy our church services. And wasn't it fun to see the kids participating this morning in church service? You know, oh, it's Zacchaeus. Yeah, and whatever else the question was. Or what's the last characteristic of love? Oh, T is for, anybody remember it? Trust, there you go. But those little ones had these things down. So it's fun to be able to meet everyone's needs. So we're going to be talking about making moral decisions. We're going to be talking about how do you build character from the inside out. So often we expect kids to act right. And we feel if they just act right, they probably have character. But actually, character comes from the inside out, with your heart full of the love for God and the principles laid down, and then you act out from what's inside. So that's what we're going to try to focus on today. But actually, there's a terrible battle going on now for your kids' minds. The devil wants to control their thinking. And he has put a huge thing in our lives right now where we were just talking about lunchtime about the significance of what's happening in Australia right now with the push for the acceptance of same-sex marriage. And we're looking at these things and how it will affect our Christian schools, and we're thinking, wow, this is amazing, the times that we're living through. And how can we have our children think positively, clearly, through this minefield that they're really growing up in? So this battle is going on for your kids' mind, and I want to explain what is so often happening and how it skews children's thinking in terms of moral decisions and behavior. I don't know, I'm going to explain the brain, but I don't know if any of you are brain surgeons, neurologists, Okay, I'm going to make this real easy, all right? There are only going to be 3 parts of the brain that I talk about, but I want to show you how easy it is for the behavior of parents dealing with their children to skew the ability of children to make decisions that are good moral decisions. All right? Here we go. First part of the brain is what we call the brain stem. Now, this is the part of the brain that comes right up the neck and into the brain, and it looks like kind of a crooked cane. This is where impulses come into your brain, and from the brain stem, they go into what we call the limbic system. Right in the midbrain is your limbic system. This is your emotional brain, and this is where we act out impulses that come into our system without even thinking. We just act them out. But hopefully God has made our brains so that the impulses will go through the limbic system, dealing with emotions, but then go to the cerebral cortex, which is right up here in your forehead. This is where your conscience is. This is where the Lord talks to you. This is where Bible texts are hidden. This is where the words of the songs that you have learned that maybe are Bible texts, this is where it's all happening. And when you have a healthy cerebral cortex, you can make good moral decisions. But the devil knows how God developed the brain, coming through the brain stem, into the limbic system, and then on into the cerebral cortex. He knows how to shortcut the system. So the way he does this is he causes, when you are young, bad things to happen to you. He causes abuse. He has people scream at you. He has you feeling like you're nothing and incompetent, and he puts all those feelings, all those negative emotions right there in the limbic system. And each time something happens that is negative to you in terms of emotion, it's like a clog in your limbic system. So the next time, let's give an illustration, then we'll carry this through. Let's say your mother had a problem with screaming, okay? When she got angry, she raised her voice and screamed, "Stop it!" or something like that. And that all your life has kind of affected you. When somebody raises their voice to you, you immediately kind of cower. And because this is laid down in the early years, when it happens to you later, let's say your wife gets angry at you and yells, "Stop it!" the chances are quite good that if you haven't healed all that bitterness that you had by your mom raising her voice and impulsively yelling at you, when your wife hits you with those words, or someone else, you will, without thinking, act from your limbic system, and you will act out behavior very much like you would have as you were a child at 4 when it first happened to you. So that's where we get adults when they're 40 years of age acting like a kid. You know, why doesn't he act grown up? Why is my husband doing this? Or why is my wife, shouting back at me? It wasn't that bad. We could have talked about this. But what's happened is it has hit a clog in the limbic system, the emotional brain, and you don't even get that stimulus going into your cerebral cortex when you can think about it and decide how is the best way to deal with this. It doesn't go there. You just act it out. And so what do? Very often, as we're raising children, we will react out of our limbic system without the thoughts even getting to the moral part of our brain, to the conscience part of our brain, and we end up abusing the next generation. And they grow up and end up abusing the next generation. And that's why it says in the Bible that the sins of the fathers are visited upon the third and the fourth generation. But wait a minute, do you even know your fifth generation? Chances are you do not. They're gone, lost and gone, you know, by the time you get to the fifth generation. And you only know the third and fourth generation. No, it doesn't just stop at the third and fourth generation. It gets worse and worse and worse. And the devil is sitting there saying, I feel he's probably just sitting there twiddling his thumbs. I know it says he's like a roaring lion running around seeing whom he can devour. But I just see him sitting there twiddling his thumbs, feet up on his desk, saying, I don't have to do anything more. They're going to self-destruct. Yeah, it gets worse and worse and worse. Unless you choose to do something to clean up your limbic system so that the impulses don't stop there, and you can think clearly. Then when the impulse goes into your limbic system, it goes right on through and gets to your cerebral cortex. Well, the only way this can happen is through this wonderful thing God has given us called forgiveness. So, when you realize that you are acting impulsively and you don't know why, you need to stop and think about the things that have happened to you in childhood. Or it could be in the teenage years, but early in your life. And you need to be able to clean this stuff out. And the way we often say to do it is to write down the junk that comes to your mind that may have happened to you in your childhood. The reason we say write it down is that your hand will write stuff that your mouth will not speak. And you'll be amazed how much more you get if you start maybe a diary, but write the stuff down that may be related to the bizarre behavior that you see yourself doing and you don't know why. It might be the way your dad treated you. It might be the way your uncle treated you. It might be just one event in your life. Maybe a sexual abuse when you were 4 years of age or something like that. But write down everything you can remember about that situation. And when you get it out of your head by physically writing it down, it's kind of a symbolic act to get it out and write it down. Then you need to say, as you write that down, I forgive the person who did this to me. And when you can do that, something happens in your brain. As you're getting it out, forgiving that other person, forgiving yourself, because many times you feel that you brought it on, which you never brought on abuse. Never. Whatever you did was not a reason for you to be abused. Okay? But you get it out, write it down, and write you are forgiven to the person who harmed you in this way. And then ask God for forgiveness, and then symbolically you got to get rid of it. Whether you burn the paper, whether you throw it in the trash, whether you tear it up and flush it down the toilet if your sewer system will handle it. Whatever you do, you gotta symbolically get it out. Now, here's where the devil is gonna play with your mind. The devil doesn't want you to go through this forgiveness thing. He doesn't want you to feel God's forgiveness. He doesn't want you to clean up your relationships. He wants you to keep abusing people and keep, this thing going down from generation to generation to generation. So you have a responsibility now to not let the pop-ups in your brain, just like on your computer, you're reading along something and then something zoop pops up into your computer. You've got to know how to push those down again and say to yourself, I forgave that person, God forgave that person, I have forgiven that person, it is over and done with, and push down the pop-up. Now what you have to start doing, because every time there is something in your brain that happens, you have started a pathway that will be easier for you to do it the next time. So you've got to retrain your brain. So when that negative thing comes up, you have to say, wait a minute, I asked forgiveness for that. I gave forgiveness for that. I know that the Lord buried it as deep as the deepest sea and put a no fishing sign there. It is gone. And so I'm going to think of something positive. And immediately when that comes up, think of something positive. And what you're going to do is try to retrain your brain now. So when that comes up, you immediately think of maybe a Bible text, or you think of something positive about the person. And so you're starting a new neurological pathway in your brain. And the more you go down that new neurological pathway, the less you're likely to go down the old one, which leads to feeling of failure and insecurity and rejection and abuse. And the more you will be strengthening a new pathway that leads to God's amazing love for you. Okay? It's easier said than done. I wrote a book with Ron and Nancy Rocky called Belonging. And if you can get a hold of that book, that will help you move through this process. But let me tell you, your children will be blessed amazingly if you can clean up your own limbic systems as quickly as possible. And it may take years. It's not sometimes an easy thing to do. And you may need to go to a Christian counselor to help you over this. But the more you can clean it up, the more you will find that your cerebral cortex is giving you amazing control over your words, over your actions. And you know what? You're not abusing your children anymore. And it's a cleanup thing that we have to do to ensure our children's characters are not ruined unto the third and fourth generation, like it says in the Bible. So that's the first step of helping your children have a positive experience in terms of character development. Any of you have any questions about that before we go on? Because we're not going to probably come back. Yes? The book is called Belonging, and it's also in Spanish, but it's called Belonging. It's a Pacific Press book. And it's by Ron and Nancy Rocky and myself. Okay? All right. I want to move on now to the 3 most important in factors that help children develop a good, positive character. They're called in factors because each one of these things begins with the word in, I-N. All right? Here we go. The first in factor is influence. The second in factor is information. And the third in factor is internal control. So, the first thing that happens to a child after he's born is he begins to be influenced by all the things that happen around him. In fact, we know that if abuse occurs to a mother after the baby is 6 months in utero, around that time, chances are in the baby's limbic system, a clog will be entered because they sense the abuse that the mother has experienced, and it goes right, it influenced the baby even before the baby is born. As soon as the baby is born, the way mom and dad reacts to that baby is immediately laid down in the child's brain. If the baby is an easy, breezy, moldable baby, the chances are great that mom and dad will hold the baby and look at the baby and talk kindly to the baby and say how beautiful the baby is. And this is extremely important for character development. God has developed that baby's eyes so the baby sees most clearly at 8 inches. Now you'll have to figure this out and whatever, but about 8 inches. And that's about how far away the baby's eyes are from your eyes when you're holding your newborn baby. So as you're talking to the baby, you'll watch. The baby will be watching you. And it's so fun. This is not a good thing to teach your baby, but researchers do it. It's so fun to see babies just shortly after birth. If you stick out your tongue to the baby and the baby's watching you, you'll see them start to try to figure out, and sure enough, out will come their little tongue. I mean, it's just amazing the influence of that first interaction. So you shouldn't be just sticking out your tongue, but it's a good illustration of how far babies are able to go, even at birth, in terms of imitating the behaviors that they see and hear in their parents. Now, if the baby is a cuddler, it's easy to cuddle the baby. But you're wanting to cuddle the baby, and what if you get a baby that instead of just cuddling into your arms and molding into your arms, stretches out his body and kicks his legs straight, and it's like, doesn't want to be snuggled? Your behavior as a reaction to the baby's behavior will probably be to strengthen your squeezing of the baby, the cuddling of the baby, and it will affect the way you look at the baby. And right then at birth, that baby's getting an indication that I'm no good. Just because his behavior is not what you expected, and you react based upon the baby's reaction in a way that would be different than if God had given you another kid. So right from the beginning, we have to be very careful that our messages through our eyes, through our voices, through our skin-to-skin contact is such that says to this baby, you are important to me. You are an amazing kid, and you have to learn to kind of give